Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning. Welcome back. Please take your seats, and we're going to get started. I hope you all had a lovely evening. For those of you who joined us in the tower last night, I hope you enjoyed yourselves and that you had a good time. We made you work very hard at the parallel sessions. So now, this morning, we're going to have reports back from those sessions. However, I'd like to start with my favorite topic. We're not planning an emergency evacuation today. So if an alarm goes off, please move to the back of the hall or use one of the exits here on your left. Walk towards the central foyer and take the stairs, not the elevator, up. And when you get out onto the street, cross the road into the park, don't shout or make a fuss. Do what you're told. And there we are. That's the emergency instructions. I really hope you enjoyed the views last night as well. It was for us an amazing experience to be able to welcome you, to be able to see Bilbao from that height. Once again, we have interpretation today, and I'd like to say hello to our interpreters who've been helping us so much. We do have a police item. 10 headsets went missing yesterday. So, I don't know what else to say about this, other than that they make terrible Christmas presents for your children. Check your bags that you inadvertently put it into your bag and forgot to give it back. They're all tagged, so we know where you live. And it's going to be a very sad Christmas when your child opens that present and there's a knock on the door. It will be our police looking for that headset back. So please, there are 10 missing, and we don't want any more missing today. The hashtag we're using on Twitter, which was very lively yesterday, I have to say, is hashtag EU-OSHA Summit. So please put up your photos and any comments you have on the events. I heard that the 3 parallel sessions yesterday were very intense, and I was sorry I didn't have the gift of bilocation or indeed trilocation, so that I was unable to visit the 3 of them. The great thing is we now have short reports back from those sessions, so that we'll get a flavour of what we have to say, of what they had to say. To our online audience and to the people here today, I'd like to remind you, this is your time. And if you'd like to ask us a question, here you can put your hand up. And on online, you can put your questions in the chat. And I will see them here on my laptop. So each of our rapporteurs back from the parallel sessions yesterday have 10 minutes. And so reporting from parallel session 1 on the inspection of MSDs prevention in enterprises, I'm delighted that we have from the Polish National Labour Inspectorate, Karolina Wolke, who's going to tell us a little bit about what went on there. So the floor is yours, Karolina.
Thank you very much. I would like to, on behalf of working group AMEX, SLEEK working group, thank EU-OSHA for opportunity of being here and to share the outcomes of our inspection campaign, which we conducted this year. It's also my great pleasure to say a few words about what kind of information and what kind of discussion we had yesterday. The first information I would like to deliver is a very comprehensive summation of what was happening this year during our inspection campaign. So we had the 9-country group which prepared the campaign, all the documentation, all the guidelines, and one checklist for each country who, on volunteer basis, participated in our campaign. Actually, 27 countries across Europe participated. It's a very good information that was so well accepted by Europe. In total, we conducted 2,621 inspections with the help of more than 1,000 labor inspectors who were trained by trainers prepared before the inspection campaign by our group during the trainer-trainer event. During the inspection, the labor inspectors visited all sizes of enterprises. Of course, we know that the small, micro and small and medium enterprises has a lot of problems with following the regulation. They need our help, our support, but actually wanted to have the information from all of the sizes, from all of the companies. We proposed the same checklist, and because we wanted to have the data which could be gathered all together. That's why we used also the online tool based on EU survey, which allows us to do this. We choose 5 sectors to this campaign. It was food industry, construction, transport and cruise activities, hairdressers, barber shops, and healthcare and social care, because we thought that they need the most of our support and enforcement. The approach which we designed for inspection campaign is highlighted on this slide. Actually, we wanted to encourage employers, enterprises, the risk assessment teams to follow the risk assessment management cycle in their approach also. So we find 2 most important steps in this cycle, that is the identification of hazards to counteract the MSDs. And there is very important to remember about 3 areas among which the risk factors have to be searched for. That is organizational psychosocial factors, individual factors, and physical risk factors. And the second important, very important step is taking actions, which of course should be appropriate for hazards which were identified. During yesterday's session, my colleagues actually, show to our audience many examples of learnings and solutions and innovative solutions which were found during the inspection campaign. Of course, we have to always remember about the hierarchy of controls, which is crucial for this step, because actually from what our findings showed is that employers, mostly, they actually introduce some actions, but what is important, there have to be appropriate. They have to be assessed whether they are not causing any other hazards, and they're actually counteracting the hazard which causes MSDs. So for each sector, very specific, tailored actions were introduced, but we also can bear in mind that some of them may be used in another sector. And also, what is important to remember, that technical devices, automatization, which actually is the best solution, but not always possible to introduce in the workstation, is one side of the coin, but on the other side, that there's awareness. there's information, there's training and performance. Because we can have very new modern devices, and workers may have them, but they have to know how to use them in a proper way. So their participation, their perspective is also very important to remember and to incorporate that. Actually, our data shows, after inspection campaign, that the presence of workers or their representatives in the process of risk assessment may favorably influence the quality of the results. Actually, in the companies where the workers were involved in risk assessment process, we found that risk assessment is fit for purpose more often. And that main factors are actually identified and the proper measures were introduced. Other very important information was that in some companies there was mutual exchange of information as well. It wasn't just that inspector was the advisor and was the person who demanded concrete actions. It was the dialogue between representatives and the labor inspectors who worked together. Because our common aim was to increase the awareness among workers, but also among employers, because of the evidence-based methods which are tailored for this kind of risk and which should be used during the identification of factors which cause musculoskeletal disorders. And few conclusions from our last session, yesterday's session, and from our campaign. First of all, we know that, but we as labor inspectors also highlighted that during the inspections that occupational safety and health is an investment. It's good to invest because actually the health of the workers, which can be, well, the damage in health as far as MSDs are concerned, could be seen in a very long perspective. So this is difficult, to catch the picture so tightly. So we have to remember that very slow actions, but actually they will be very fruitful for workers and for employers, and effectiveness actually. The engagement of top management is very important because actually without the positive attitude and support of management, top management, the workers will not feel responsible to do anything more. They will just do what it was supposed to do, what is supposed to be done, right? But when the top management says that we care about your health, so the workers feel the responsibility for themselves and for their colleagues and families, and they want to perform work safely. It isn't about just, asking questions or giving the training. It's more like having small talks, performance together. Sometimes it is, well, actually the philosophy of risk assessment says that it is generally in the workstation the risks should be identified and assessed, but sometimes we encounter vulnerable groups of workers because of the gender, because of the age, because of the country of origins. There may be various factors which actually should be taken into consideration. And if there is such a situation, I believe that we should do individually the process of risk assessment. It would be more beneficial for all actors in this process. We also found out that the campaign, when it is devoted to one subject, it's better with the results because everybody are focused on one subject. That's why we think that this pattern is pretty effective. And also we had a discussion in our group also, about the balance which should be kept by labor inspectors as far as advisory function of labor inspector is concerned, and also the enforcement role. Some countries in national reports, they said that they will do the follow-up, and that is a very positive information that we gathered from this campaign, that it won't be just 1 year, but it will last longer. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Carolina. Thank you for your understanding. I have to keep everybody on track up here. So when I stand up, it's always very threatening and ominous. I'm afraid I can't really see the back of the arena. But would anybody like to ask a question to Carolina about what she has just said, or regarding the contents of the parallel session? Because if not, then we'll move on. You have time. You have time. We'll ask you again after the next speaker. So, reporting for parallel session 2 on working with chronic MSDs, please welcome Anthony Wolf of the Global Alliance for Musculoskeletal Health. Welcome, Anthony, and you have 10 minutes.
Thank you very much. So, I'd like to report back on our discussions around chronic conditions and working with them. And just some background to remind you that musculoskeletal disorders are the greatest cause of disability across Europe and affect all working ages. They're not just confined to older people. There's a wide variety of problems such as osteoarthritis, osteoporosis with fragility fractures, rheumatoid arthritis, gout, and then regional pain problems such as neck pain, back pain, sciatica, fibromyalgia. And although these aren't caused by work, they impact on people's ability to work, and many end up leaving the labour market prematurely. And the impact is increasing with ageing workforces and more people leaving the labour market. And this is causing real problems when across Europe we have a general shortage of labour. Recognition of this problem was shown by the research for the campaign and the campaign itself, which has had a focus around working with chronic MSDs. We also had the discussion yesterday. We had 3 talks around working with chronic MSDs and early intervention and role of physical activity, the importance of early intervention, and some good case studies for individuals of how they got around the problem. And we had various position statements and a discussion. And from this, I'd like to bring together some key messages. The first overriding message is that it's a shared responsibility for all members of society to enable people with chronic MSDs to participate in healthy and sustainable work. And this requires a multifactored, multidisciplinary approach, focusing around the individual, that brings together the employer and managers, the employee, experts in occupational health, a healthcare team, all working together with a common goal of enabling the person to stay in work. The key message is that you do not have to be 100% fit to work, and good work is good for people with chronic MSDs. We no longer tell people to rest and wait, but actually to keep active. Disability can now be prevented in many of these conditions with effective treatment, or the degree of disability can be modified, but that requires access to appropriate care. And many of the interventions are actually quite simple and of low cost with a positive return on investment. So what are our individual roles and responsibilities? So I've broken down the key messages as to what different people should do. So workers need to be able to speak up and report problems and access timely help. Too often they wait until they have to leave the labour market. They need to be able to take simple measures such as stretching exercises, physical activity, and follow advice they're given by occupational health and healthcare professionals, because they have been shown to reduce work loss and a positive return on investment. They need to work together with their employer, their managers and healthcare professionals to co-design solutions many of which are simple and low cost, that enable them to remain in the workplace and be in control of their own health and their destiny, which is very important, and ensure that work tasks match their abilities through tailored risk assessment. They need to be able to modify their daily routine. There needs to be some flexibility so they can self-manage their condition. And they need the support from their peers and managers. Too often, people with aches and pains are seen as someone whinging and trying to get out of doing the job. And that culture needs to change. Following on from the message from the last report, there needs to be commitment at the high level within the workplace from the managers that they support a positive health and safety culture, particularly around musculoskeletal conditions. They need to understand the physical and psychological impact of these conditions, pain, fatigue, which is a particular feature of inflammatory diseases, and they need to enable, encourage, and respond to early reporting of MSDs by having an open cultures where people can talk about the cultures and work with their managers to co-design solutions. Workplaces need to facilitate early intervention, such as simple adaptations to work, or through access to occupational healthcare services. Involvement of individuals to plan their needs to enable return to work and retention is crucial. As I said, co-design was a strong message. Workers need to be facilitated to do simple things, do their exercises, do their physical activity, self-manage their problem, because usually they know how they cope at home and at the weekends, and they need to apply that within the workplace. And also, we need to make sure that as new work processes are introduced or new patterns of work happen, that they take into account people with chronic MSDs. And so we need to design inclusive workplaces for a diverse workforce, universal design. The messages for healthcare professionals is that many outside the occupational health community do not think about work as being a clinical outcome, and that needs to change. So we all need to start talking to people with chronic MSDs about how does it impact on their work and how can that be worked around. And we need to ensure that individuals know how to manage their MSDs and that they get timely advice from someone with the right competencies. And we had a presentation explaining that physiotherapists, for example, with expertise in occupational health, are able to give more tailored advice to people than perhaps a more generalist physiotherapist. Then some top-line messages for policymakers, that we need to make sure that health system, occupational health and social security processes are joined up. Too often they're separate and don't work together. And so we need to make sure that there's integration in policies and practices so there aren't barriers which actually stop the goal of enabling someone to stay in the workplace. And we need to consider the recommendations of the Disability Employment Package about retaining persons with disabilities in employment, which is part of the European Commission strategy for rights of persons with disabilities. And I think that's taking a very promising approach about helping people stay in work even if they have some limitations. Challenges. I think it's been a great campaign, but it doesn't stop here. We have to keep pushing forward and find ways of getting employers to become proactive with good practices being shared so you can see that it's not complicated, it's not costly to do the right thing. We need to get greater recognition of the importance of musculoskeletal health amongst the population at all ages. People do not value it until they lose it, and particularly it came up in discussions about children, making sure they understand the importance of physical activity. And then we also have to recognize that an awful lot of people across Europe are employed in small and medium enterprises, and so we have to think about how they can do the right thing, because quite often our examples are of very large organizations which have a totally different scale of resources. And finally, thank you to EU-OSHA for such a proactive campaign. I say this on behalf of the MSK community, who've been advocating for musculoskeletal conditions for a long time, and it's been a great campaign, evidence-based but very practical, trying to move the agenda forward and give opportunities to prevent and support people with MSDs. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Take your seat. Thank you. So now's your chance if you'd like to ask any questions of any members of the panel who have spoken so far. And I see you're all in quiet mode today. That's okay. And of course, we will also have a coffee break later. So now, where you can chat and discuss these issues. So reporting from parallel session 3 on psychosocial risks and MSDs, I'm delighted to welcome my colleague Małgorzata Milczarek, who is the interim head of the Prevention and Research Unit here in EU-OSHA in Bilbao. So the floor is yours and you have 10 minutes.
Thank you very much, Brenda, and good morning to everyone. I would like to report to you some main messages and conclusions of the workshop number 3. And I would like to start saying thank you very much to all the speakers that presented yesterday. We indeed had 4 very insightful, very interesting presentations. Richard Graveling was providing evidence for the association between psychosocial risk factors and the occurrence and prevention on musculoskeletal disorders. Irene Kloimurer presented some success factors for successful return to work after MSD in the context of psychosocial risks at work. Cristina Di Teco focused on some very interesting data from Italy and also talked about the importance and the role of EU and national strategies. And Yves Rockeler presented psychosocial risk factors for MSDs in the context of new forms of work and digitalization. So what were some of the main messages? It has been widely acknowledged, and literature confirms that musculoskeletal disorders are multifactorial. We know that individual factors matter, we know that lifestyle factors matter, we know that even our hobbies may contribute to MSDs. But the evidence is strong. Work-related factors do contribute to the development or deterioration of musculoskeletal disorders. And psychosocial risk factors that are related to MSDs, especially, are excessive work demands, lack of control at work, and lack of social support at work. Role conflict, job insecurity, violence and harassment are also important. There is a need to manage, to assess and manage and prevent those risks. On a more positive note, the good message is that psychosocial risks are also part of the solution. Positive associations are also found in the literature, and we know that some psychosocial issues, such as, for example, good social relationships at work, good social support from managers and from co-workers, have a protective role and are important for both prevention and return to work. We need systematic, holistic, participatory approach to risk assessment that it's looking at both musculoskeletal and psychosocial risk factors. And follow-up preventive measures have also covered both of these issues. Then, in terms of the return to work, the prevention of MSDs must be based on a good risk assessment. This is important at any time, but this is also important at the moment when the problem occurs and the worker is returning to work. Ad hoc risk assessment cannot be limited to some ergonomic factors. Those ad hoc risk assessments must be also holistic and must be also participatory, must include psychosocial risk factors and ergonomic risk factors. We heard about some success factors for sustainable long-term return to work. And we know that such a return to work must be embedded in a wider company culture. There must be a health policy in place, there must be awareness about the chronic illnesses, and also competence building. Supportive culture, good communication, facilitating external support. And there must be also some workplace adjustment, both in terms of ergonomics, but also in terms of psychosocial risks, looking at the workload, looking at the time pressure. This will allow gradual and timely and sustainable return to work. And finally, there is also an important role of the worker that must be willing to be actively engaged, to have positive attitude and trust. The important message that we also heard before is that some workers with musculoskeletal disorders may be never 100% fit again, but with adequate adjustment at work and by focusing on the workers' available capabilities, they may still be able to work lifelong. Now focus on the strategies. But first, let's have a look at the data coming from the Italian National Survey. This data shows that, indeed, workers that are exposed to work-related stress report back pain, lower limb pain, and also shoulders, neck, upper limb pain more often than workers that are not reporting exposure to work-related stress. What is also important to highlight here, that this direction goes in both ways. Work-related stress contributes to musculoskeletal disorders, but also experiencing MSDs, especially chronic MSDs, and especially when there is lack of understanding for the problem in the workplace, also contributes to work-related stress. We heard about the importance and the role of concerted actions by different actors, about the important role of EU and national strategies and soft law policies and prevention system and other actors that can contribute to the prevention and also support workplaces in prevention of MSDs. And then in the last presentation, we focus on digitalization and new forms of work. It was highlighted that digitalization generates new psychosocial risks, or it increases the other well-known psychosocial risks, increases the exposure. Some of the psychosocial risks that are on increase in the digitalized workplaces are high work intensity, cognitive overload, digital fatigue, mental exhaustion, some MSD risk factors, prolonged sitting, or, on the other hand, repetitive simple tasks. What is observed in such workplaces is poor social relationships at work, which are crucial for the prevention of both psychosocial risks and musculoskeletal disorders. Job insecurity, high emotional demands, for example, related to the fact of being permanently under surveillance, and also blurred boundaries between work and personal life. So our risk assessment, OSH policies, must be adapted to the new forms of work and digital workplaces. But also what is important to highlight is that digitalization brings OSH risks, but also opportunities. It depends on how the technologies are implemented, managed, and regulated. The presentations were followed by very interesting discussion and very insightful questions from the audience. Some of the issues we were focusing were related to the self-employed workers and how those who need to rely on self-regulation can be supported. What is the role of medical doctors? What is the role of preventive services? We also focus on the young people that come to the workplaces with the mindset that is specific for their generation. We know that young workers are exposed to a number of psychosocial risks at work. On the other hand, what is also observed is young workers are not necessarily interested in digital disconnection. They want to be connected. So how they can be supported in preventing their musculoskeletal health and also mental health. We were discussing and reflecting on how to create a healthy work culture, how to create good social relationships, and how to assure good worker participation in excessive teleworking, in hybrid work, when workers work for 60, 80, 90% alone in their homes. And finally, we are also reflecting on how to use the opportunities that digitalization brings, how to use the digital solutions for prevention of both psychosocial risks and musculoskeletal risks. We look forward to the next campaign that will hopefully provide many practical solutions and good practices in this regard. Finally, I wanted to stress that this is just a very short snapshot of the workshop that we had yesterday. All the research results, all the information is available through the publications that are accessible through EU-OSHA website. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Małgosia. Now, if any of you would like to ask a question, just raise your hand. In the meantime, from the online world, we have received a question from Portugal. And the question is directed to Carolina, but I think it's actually a question for all of you. So Claudia from Portugal asks, do you believe that the excellent results of this campaign will be at risk of becoming forgotten, a secondary preoccupation? Do you have any suggestions on how we can keep up the good work while implementing and working on the new campaign on digitalization? So I'll let you start, Carolina.
Thank you very much. Well, I hope that there isn't any risk that it will be forgotten. Actually, labor inspectors on a daily basis had to deal with ergonomics and risk factors which causes MSDs. So actually, maybe not exactly in the form as it was presented during this event, but actually the information are delivered every day to employers and employees. And as I said before, a labor inspector has two roles. One is enforcement, and he has to demand that regulation have to be followed. But on the other hand, there is the advisory role. So all the information which can convince employees and employers that health is the most valuable thing we have in our life, that is the advantage of our job and our aim. So I hope that there isn't any risk, because this is daily job.
Oh, that's good to hear. Anthony, do you think we can flow well into the next campaign on digitalization?
I think that has to be done, because I think it's very important that campaigns aren't just seen as a campaign and that's finished, but how do we really keep moving the agenda forward? And as you're saying, if the next campaign is around digitalization and that form of working and home working, etc., we know that MSD problems increase in that sort of workspace, and how can we bring up those messages? A lot of the solutions are common about keeping physically active, taking mini breaks. So I think it's a way of repeating the messages in whatever setting, whatever campaign, and not forgetting them. And also, when it comes to mental health issues, we know there's a very close interaction between mental and physical, and again, continuing to highlight. So I think we have a natural nature to work in silos. We're much more comfortable keeping things narrow, and I think we've got to really think hard about how we overcome that barrier.
Yeah, thank you. Małgosia?
Thank you, Brenda, and thank you for the question. I can only confirm that this is indeed the intention of EU-OSHA. We want to follow up on the research and on all the actions carried out during this campaign. The campaign on digitalization will focus also on psychosocial risks. The campaign on digitalization will be aiming at raising awareness about OSH risks, but also on opportunities that digitalization brings in terms of prevention. Apart from the campaign, also research that is being done in EU-OSHA is also focusing on first, on psychosocial risks. We've just started this year a major research overview on psychosocial risk and mental health at work, but also we are doing a major research program on healthcare, and musculoskeletal disorders in the healthcare sector will be also focused on one of the research within this OSH overview as a follow-up to the research already done.
Yeah, thank you. We have another question from Portugal. Clearly, a lot of interest in Portugal at the moment. Horacio asks, I think the gist of his declaration is that we talk a lot about self-regulation, whereas he asked the question, why don't leaders and contracts, performance contracts, include mandatory things to make sure that managers are taking care of MSDs in workplaces? Why, he asks, does EU-OSHA not build and nurture a strong community of European practitioners with a great social innovative task to empower citizens? What do you think of that, Małgosia? I'm coming back to you on that again.
Very challenging question, but very good one. Very good one.
Yeah.
I will refer to the last point, and by sharing the information again that we indeed look at the prevention services and the role of these preventive services in different European countries, and we want to look how well the preventive services are prepared to provide information that is relevant to the workplaces that are observed today. And indeed, the prevention of psychosocial risk, prevention of MSDs in the workplaces must be embedded in organizational initiatives. This is the responsibility of the employers. These are the organizational initiatives that must be in place to successfully prevent MSDs. When we talk about self-regulation, it was in the context of self-employed. So when this worker-employer relationships are not existent, or they are not well defined, and responsibility is blurred. So it's not our intention to leave everything on the shoulders of the self-employed worker. We want to look at the solutions. We want to look and see how they can be supported. And again, what could be the role of preventive services, of what could be the role of workplaces or platform owners and other actors that are providing work to those workers. It's a challenging topic, but it's a very important one.
Yeah, okay. Anthony, I'll give you a quick comment there, because I'd like a microphone over here, please, for this gentleman who will...
To the first part of the question,
Yeah.
around the contracting process, and I think there are opportunities in contracts, for example, big construction contracts, to make sure that they follow good OSH principles, but particularly in the subcontracting process as a way of getting down to the SMEs who are often actually delivering. So I think there are opportunities.
Fair point. Thank you very much. Yes, please go ahead. We have a question from our audience here in Bilbao.
Thank you. Richard Grayling. I have a thing I'd perhaps like Anthony to expand on a little. First of all, just a comment on the last point. I mean, there are one or two good examples of that. I think one that's always held up in the UK is the building of the Olympic site, where the main contractors did actually place health and safety requirements on their subcontractors. But my point to Anthony is I wonder whether we need to add to your list of challenges. It's something you touched on in the course of your presentation, but I think one of the issues we face is reaching out to the primary healthcare providers. And I know that they're perhaps beyond the role and remit of EU-OSHA, but I'm struck by a particular example that I spoke about yesterday. I met a lady who had an office job, and her opening remarks to me were, "My doctor has told me I will never work with a computer again." This was a lady who had sore wrists and forearms, a chronic condition, and if you're faced with that as a barrier, what do you, as a professional working in, so how do we reach out to those primary providers?
I totally agree that it is an issue, and was on our list about what clinicians need to do. I'm a rheumatologist, and I do happen to ask people about their work and whether they can do it, but I know many people in the healthcare system do not ask about it, do not want to get involved in it, feel that it'll become a form-filling exercise about fitness to work, etc. And they're not educated either in it. So I think it is something we do have to focus. But I think by being very person-centered and thinking about what do people want, and most people want to be independent and have an income and stay in work. And so I think we've got to really try and encourage clinicians to think about the needs of people, the functional needs of people, not just the medical model, and focus on that, and just get into asking simple questions about it. And so I think we need to embed occupational health into general health care.
Yeah. Thank you very much, and thank you to our three rapporteurs reporting back. I think they deserve a round of applause.